Hello, lovelies. Okay, today we are going to be answering a question. I thought it was quite a good question. Why are some of us obsessed with Egypt? Why do some of us seem to be on the path of initiation? It's a very interesting question indeed, because working with magical Egypt for 20 years, as I have been, has shown me that there are lots of people that have a very, very deep fascination with ancient Egypt. And there is a very good reason for that. It's simply because we remember it. Our soul remembers it. And that is called Anamnesis. I'm going to read you a little bit from a book that I have by a Baron Rachane. And he's actually talking about Plato. Plato talking about anamnesis. Let's jump into it. The key of anamnesis came down to Plato from Egypt through Pythagoras. As Dr. Raghavan Iyer summarizes, thus the soul, since it is immortal and has been born many times, and has seen all things both here and in other worlds, has learned everything that is. So we need not be surprised if it can recall the knowledge of virtue or anything else it once possessed. All nature is akin, and the soul has learned everything, so that when a man has recalled a single piece of knowledge, learned it in ordinary language, there is no reason why we should not find out all the rest. If he keeps a stout heart and does not worry of the search for seeking and learning, he will realize they are nothing but recollections. Anamnesis is the true soul memory, intermittent access to the divine wisdom within every human being and immortal spectator. All self-conscious monads have been known over immemorial time, a vast host of subjects and objects, modes and forms. Assuming a complex series of roles and an essential part of an endless process of learning, the soul becomes captive currently to myriad forms of maya, illusion, and delusion. At the same time, the soul has the innate and inward capacity to cognize that it is more than any and all of those masks. I like to call anamnesis remembering. And in fact, I think anamnesis is so important that last year I created a group for the magical Egypt people called the Anamnesis Society. And what we were doing is we had people that had past life memories of Egypt come into our group and kind of try to put puzzle pieces together to see if we could actually unlock some of the knowledge of the ancients. And it was really fascinating. And I came across a couple of people that really, really had some profound remembrances. Marla Durden had a understanding of what pharaoh means that really kind of blew my mind. And then there was another gentleman that I won't mention his name that had incredibly detailed remembrances of the mummification process and the purpose of mummification. And we're going to get into that in a little bit because Steiner talks about that as well and why it's relevant. But the remembrances were incredibly profound and very esoteric, so not necessarily something we could turn into a free energy machine. But look, these remembrances from ancient Egypt are something that are actually quite recognized and recorded in the marketplace. And one in particular, her name was Omm Seti, had a great story, which was really, really interesting. But more than that, she was able to provide legitimate archaeologists with profound and important information about ancient Egypt that shed more light on their investigations. Her story is quite interesting, in fact. Omm Seti, when she was 3, fell down the stairs and died. The family doctor was surprised when the parents summoned him back to the house an hour later, and she was alive and perfectly happy. However, she wasn't the same person anymore. She began speaking English with a foreign accent, and she would sit beneath the kitchen table crying and asking her parents to take her home. She had vivid dreams of a vast building with large columns and beautiful gardens. When she was 4, her parents took her to the British Museum in London, and initially she felt bored, but when she saw the Egyptian sculptures, she went mental and ran up to them and was hugging them, and she didn't want to leave the museum. She told the parents that these were her people. Eventually, she got married to an Egyptian man and moved to Egypt, and there she began to have mysterious dreams which revealed to her her true identity. She remembered being born about 3,000 years ago, and at the age of 3, her mother died and her father had given her to the temple. When she was 12, the high priest offered her to either leave the temple or become a priestess. And really, because she didn't have any other options, she took vows of celibacy and became a holy priestess. But not long after that, she met Pharaoh Seti I, and they became secret lovers, and she got pregnant. Rumors of her pregnancy quickly spread around the temple like they do. And the penalty for breaking the holy vows of celibacy was death, right? So to protect her beloved Pharaoh from humiliation, she committed suicide. Okay, so back to Dorothy. Now, the Egyptians had given Dorothy the name Omm Seti, mother of Seti, since she had a son, Seti. Her husband couldn't take her obsession with Egypt, and he left. So they divorced, and she dedicated her life to the study of ancient Egypt. And she found herself a job at the archaeological site near, quote-unquote, her temple, Seti I, in Abydos. One of the Egyptologists tested the authenticity of her claims. While being in complete darkness, he asked her to identify artifacts inside the Temple of Seti, and Omm Seti could describe the paintings and the artifacts with astonishing accuracy. She baffled the Egyptologists since only a few people knew what was inside of the temple. Also, archaeologists found a garden next to the temple. The garden was at the very same location which she had pinpointed 50 years before. And as a result of these, all the leading Egyptologists at the time took her opinion seriously. Her knowledge actually solved a large number of mysteries about the life of ancient Egyptians. So it's a very interesting case, isn't it, that not only did she had such vivid memories of ancient Egypt that she was able to provide actual information to archaeologists. Now, I'm not saying that this is the case for everybody. Obviously, not everybody has the same degree of recollection that Omm Seti had. However, I do believe a lot of us have soul remembrances. I think that I keep coming back to why magical Egypt struck such a chord with people, and that is because the history, as people were taught in schools, was not something that sat well with people. At a very, very deep level, people had an understanding that there was much more to this story than what they were being told. And the reason that they had this feeling that there was a lot more to the story came from their soul remembrances of being in ancient Egypt. Now, I know I'm asking a lot of you, I'm asking you to believe in a soul and believe in reincarnation and believe that we can remember things from other incarnations. And I know we all know that person who is Cleopatra in their past life. And that kind of thing makes it really hard because seriously, how many Cleopatras can there be, right? However, my favorite man of the moment, Rudolph Steiner, has a lot to say about this. And what he says actually makes a lot of sense, not from just the perspective of anamnesis, but also from the perspective of why we find ourselves in this situation that we are in today. Rudolf Steiner also believes in reincarnation. And as he says in Egyptian Myths and Mysteries, lecture number 1, to one who has already carefully studied the idea of spiritual science, it will not seem strange that one should look for a connection between widely separated periods of time. It is one of our basic convictions that the human soul continually returns, that the experiences between birth and death occur repeatedly for us. The doctrine of reincarnation has become ever more familiar to us. When we reflect on this, we may ask, since these souls dwell in us today that have been here before, is it possible that they were also present in ancient Egypt during the Egyptian cultural epoch? That the same souls are in us, which at the time looked up at the gigantic pyramids and the enigmatic sphinxes? Well, if that were the case, that would explain a lot, wouldn't it? That would explain why so many people flock to Egypt on tours. And for Steiner, the answer to this question is yes. Our souls have beheld the old cultural monuments that they see again today. The same souls that lived then have gone through later periods and have appeared again in our own time. We know that no life remains without fruit. We know what the soul has gone through in the ways of experiences remain within it and appear in later incarnations as powers, temperaments, capacities, and dispositions. Thus, the way we look on nature today, the way we take up what our time brings forth, the way we view the world, and all this was prepared in ancient Egypt, in the land of the pyramids. We were then prepared in such a way that we now look at the physical world as we do. Just how these widely separated periods link themselves, we will now explore. So before we go on to that section, I just want to ask you if there is some uncanny skill or technique that you have. I think I've talked about Chance before, and how Chance basically picked up a guitar and was able to play it like a maestro very, very quickly. And he himself will tell you that it feels like he had learned this skill before, that it was something that came with him. It was not a struggle at all for him to learn incredibly complex guitar licks. And so in a way, Chance played guitar in a previous life, but in that same way, we could have all had experiences in ancient Egypt that echo down to us today. Now, Rudolph goes on to explain a very, very interesting situation. And I wasn't aware of this when I met this young man who recalled his mummification in ancient Egypt. He was telling me that he was a soldier in ancient Egypt and there was a conflict, and he places it all in time and space with an accuracy that is kind of interesting. And he explains that he and his fellow soldiers had agreed to remain connected to the earth so that they could awaken at a certain time and kind of pay back some karma. And this idea of karma is something that Rudolph Steiner talks about as well. And to make things even more interesting, I only found this out after I was speaking to the young man, but Steiner talks about mummification and karma as well in a very, very interesting way. And he kind of explains why we're in the situation we're in today in terms of our materialistic prison paradigm. Yes, I know that's one of my favorite subjects, but we've got to get it into our heads for God's sakes. But he talks about the mummification processes of the ancient Egyptians and how that has impacted us today. So let me read again from the same lecture. We recall how the Egyptian handled the dead. We remember the mummies and how the Egyptian concerned himself that the outer physical form should be preserved for a long time. We know that he filled his tombs with such mummies. in which he had preserved the outer form and mementos of the past physical life, he gave to the deceased certain utensils and possessions suited to the needs of physical life. Thus, what the person had had in the physical was to be retained. In this way, the Egyptians bound the dead to the physical plane. This custom developed more and more and is a special earmark of the old Egyptian culture. Such a thing is not without consequences for the soul. Let us remember that our souls were in Egyptian bodies. This is quite correct. Our souls were incorporated in these bodies that became mummies. We know that when man, after death, is freed from his physical and etheric bodies, he has a different consciousness. He is by no means unconscious in the astral world. He can look down from the spiritual world, even though today he cannot look up. He can then look down on the physical earth. It is not then indifferent to him whether his body has been preserved as a mummy, has been burned, or has decayed. A definite kind of connection arises through this. We shall see this mysterious connection through the fact that in ancient Egypt the bodies were preserved for a long time. When they looked down, they knew, that is my body. They were bound to this physical body. They had the form of their body before them. This body became important to their souls, for their soul is susceptible to impressions after death. The impressions made by the mummified body imprinted itself deeply, and the soul was formed in accordance with this impression. These souls went through incarnations in the Greco-Latin period, and in our own time they are living in us. It was not without effect that they saw their mummified bodies after death. They were repeatedly led back to their bodies. This is by no means unimportant. They attached their sympathies to these bodies, and the fruit of their looking down upon them appears now in the fifth period in the inclination that souls have today to lay great weight upon the outer physical life. All that we describe today as the attachment to matter stems from the fact that the souls at that time, out of the spiritual world, could look down upon their own embodiment. Through this, man learned to love the physical world. Through this, it is so often said today that the only important thing is the physical body between birth and death. Such views do not arise out of nothing. This is not a criticism of the practice of mummying. We only want to point to certain necessities that are connected with the repeated incarnating of the soul. Without this pondering on the mummies, men would not have been equal to developing further. We would by now have lost all interest in the physical world had the Egyptians not had the mummy cult. It had to be thus if a proper interest in the physical world was to be awakened. That we see this world as we do today is a consequence of the fact that the Egyptians mummified the physical body after death. This cultural stream was under the influence of initiates who could see into the future. Not through any whim did men make mummies. Particularly in those days, mankind was led by high individualities who prescribed what was right. This was done under authority. In the school of the initiates, it was known that our fifth epoch, which is our time, was connected with the third epoch. These mysterious connections stood at that time before the eyes of the priests, who instituted mummification so that the souls might acquire this disposition to seek spiritual experience in the external physical world. So basically what Steiner is saying, so let me untangle that. Steiner believes in the cyclical nature of time, and he believes in incarnations of humanity, and that humanity evolves through these epochs and through these different incarnations. And it really is fascinating stuff, right? I mean, he goes really back all the way to whence humanity came. And it's a really good story. We have, we have male and female joined together in a kind of a mushy very unmaterial body. And we go through and our consciousness changes through all of these stages. And I find it really, really fascinating. His occult history. Again, his story. I find his story very interesting. But anyway, as part of this evolutionary process, the souls keep being reincarnated into these different epochs. And so what he is saying is that the souls of the ancient Egyptians are the same souls that are in us today. And as a result of that, we have memories. Our soul has memories of our time in ancient Egypt. And in addition to that, our souls have memories of our time once we died from ancient Egypt. And we were up in the other realms. And because of the process of mummification, we were attached to the physical world because our bodies remained in the physical world. And because of that attachment, we became fascinated with the material nature of the world. And voila, our souls have reincarnated today, and we have a fascination with the material nature of creation. And of course, a fascination with ancient Egypt. And I think that at the end of the day, this is why Steiner put so much emphasis within his work to what he calls spiritual science, to once again opening ourselves up to more than just the material. In fact, I believe that this was his number one imperative, and all of his work is designed to open man back up to the spiritual world. Now, as Steiner says, he's not saying that being attached to the material is bad. He says that it was indeed a necessary thing for our evolution, possibly to develop our technology or our minds the way that we have. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that our evolution ends here, and that our evolution will once again require us to open up to the faculties of knowing within ourselves that allow us to once again contact spiritual realms. So, why are we fascinated with ancient Egypt? Because we have been there before. Now, to the question of why do us find ourselves on the initiatory path while others don't? And by initiatory path, I mean the path of awakening, possibly the path to awakening to the fact that there is more than just the material world. And I've mentioned her before, but Georgia Lambert, whose school I went to undertake some initiation training, really did a great job of explaining why some people become an initiate. Now, the path of an initiate is not an easy path. And the bottom line is that we don't get here because it's fun, right? We get here because of evolution. The way that Georgia explains it is that the reason that we start along the path of initiation is only because of pain. Now, I know that once we get along the path, and those people that are interested in like theurgic traditions or devotion yoga are moving along the path because of love and desire, of knowing the Godhead, of union with the Godhead, or whatever you want to call it. But it is a love that is pulling the initiate along that path. But the very beginning of the path of initiation is one where you experience so much pain that you need to find a different way of being, a different way of doing things. And it is only once you make the decision to stop letting the forces of the world batter you into evolving that you are going to take the evolutionary process into your own hands and under your own control. That is really the first step on your journey to self-initiated evolution. Evolution occurs naturally on the planet. It is often said that we do not need a temple today to go through the initiatic journey, as just being alive today is so incredibly complex that we are being self-initiated, or we have the option, we have the choice to use them for our own personal evolution or not, right? But I certainly know that every day I have choices to make, choices that I can don't lose my temper, remain calm. This is not my body. This is not even my mind. Don't be reactive. Put separation between my thoughts so that I can choose how to act rather than react. These are all the kind of things that initiates would be taught in the temples back then. But the point is that life provides us with lots of opportunities to evolve, whether we decide we want to become an initiate or not, whether we are interested in being an initiate or not. The world gives us those opportunities. Now, we enter the path of the initiate once, quite simply, the pain of living under those circumstances becomes too great. And we make the decision that no longer are we willing to let the outside circumstances dictate our evolutionary growth. We decide to take charge of our lives and take charge of the evolutionary process ourselves. As Georgia would say, that after the personality has reached a certain place in the evolutionary process, his growth becomes a conscious, self-initiated activity. In cooperation with the plan of evolution, the incarnating entity initiates those experiences which will expand the awareness of the personal self to include the awareness of the spiritual soul. And there are different stages, right? The first stage is where the personality has awakened to the essential truth of his being. He recognizes that truth as his spiritual identity in nature. The second stage is that the individual willingly undergoes a purification process through self-initiated disciplinary training, which usually covers a period of several incarnations. He subjects his emotional nature to divine law and the energy of love. Thus, he purifies his lower desire nature, transmuting it into aspirations to God. So this is where the moving away from pain and moving towards love part of the journey occurs. Okay? So up until this point in the initiation process, we're still just trying to get away from pain. The next stage is the major initiation, in which the whole consciousness becomes illumined, so to speak, with the light of logoic purpose. He undergoes a great awakening and begins with wisdom to glimpse the cause back of all that he was. He is cognizant of the reality underlying all forms and begins to think in terms of and to work with energy. Is that why I do energy sex? I'm so freaking enlightened. Such a one directs his life and affairs from the level of the soul, functioning in the world as an accepted disciple of the Christ. Well, I guess that counts me out then. And then from there, the initiations get so intense that I don't know if anybody on planet Earth has actually done them in this time. So I'm not even going to go there. But you get the idea, right? So we start off in this situation where creation's plan is that we are to evolve. And so creation creates the conditions for it. So let's go back to the ancient Egyptians for a moment. As Steiner says, humanity's consciousness would not have evolved had the wisdom keepers not pointed the Egyptians to do the process of mummification to instigate a fascination with matter that would drive us into the kind of consciousness that we are in today. Everything is perfect, right? So So even though I particularly don't enjoy the materialistic prism paradigm, Steiner would say that this was a necessary part of nature, of creation, creating environment in which we will evolve. And it is our choice whether we allow ourselves to keep bopping around in the ocean and being battered by the waves, or whether we undertake the step to begin the process of self-initiation. And pain, the driver at this point, the desire to stop the insanity, right? Let's stop the insanity. So as I mentioned to you, my mother died when I was 16, right? That was really painful. And that's where my story of self-initiation began 40 years ago. And so to answer the question, some people might just have really strong pain thresholds. I met a girl when I was working at the psychic hotline in San Diego. And she explained to me that her biggest problem in life was that she had a really strong pain threshold. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me at the time. I'm thinking, isn't that good that you have a really strong pain threshold? But it wasn't. What she was trying to say is that she was able to take a lot of shit. And she was able to take so much shit that it took her such a long time to start the self-initiation process, right? So I guess I'm a wimp, right? I started when I was 16. Things have changed. Part of being on this self-initiation process is that you learn how to deal with all kinds of things, right? Pain included, and heartbreak and suffering and betrayal, all those kinds of things. So I guess why some people haven't started the process of self-initiation or waking up is that they haven't reached their pain threshold yet. And they are happy to let nature do the evolution for them themselves. When I was in Austin, Texas, I was working on a ashram with peacocks and a guru and everything, selling media, right? Doing advertising on an ashram. Very interesting combination of things, I think. Methinks. But anyway, the guru that was resident with his virgins and everything had a very thick Indian accent, and we all kind of used to make fun of him because of it, because we were heathens, of course. And we would mimic him. Lemon tree, very pretty, but the lemon flower is sweet, or whatever the words were, right? Because he would use the lemon tree as an example of humanity. And even though we were making fun of him at the time, his analogy is very apt. And what he was saying is that if you look at a lemon tree, you have fruit that are perfect and yellow and ready to jump into. But there are other fruit that are really ripe and that have fallen off the tree and have begun to rot. And at the same time, there are also little tiny green lemons that are not yet ripe. And even beyond that, there are beautiful, sweet little flowers that haven't even become fruits yet. And so that's what humanity is like. Humanity is a big tree, and we have fruits at every stage, and it is perfect, and it is nature, and it is just the way that it is. And so, I don't know, am I a rotting fruit? I think I am. I don't know. But you get my point, right? I have started the journey of self-initiation. And so I'm some kind of fruit, right? I'm fruity. But that doesn't mean that a flower is any less doing its purpose than a rotting fruit on the ground. It's just nature. So, lovelies, I am hoping that that was interesting. And I hope that it answered your question, my dear. But it was a lot to throw at you. I'm hoping it answers your questions as best that I can do today. Then we'll get back on our track. Well, we have 3 tracks that we're going on right now. Oh, Lord. Let's see if we can keep up with all of these storylines that we have going. I guess I'm trying to do that thing, it's like, You can watch a series where there's like only one storyline, but they put 3 storylines in it. Like, what is the butler really up to keep you interested? So, yeah, I'm using that technique. Anyway, lovelies, I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you for listening, lovelies. And if you like this podcast and would like to support us, please go to magicalegypt.com. And I have made a special discount coupon just for you all. And the coupon code is LOVE. And that will get you $30 off any Magical Egypt purchase. Also, I've started Patreon, so you can mosey on over there and see if you want to contribute. But I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate all your support, and more soon.